G'day and welcome to another gun related video on my channel. Now a little while ago, if you watched my channel, I did a video on this rifle here, the Winchester Model 69A. I did one of my general history, description and review videos. I'll just put it up the top there, so if you haven't seen it you can go back and watch it if you want. It might be worth doing before you actually watch this one. Or you can watch this one and then watch that one. Now, at the time I talked about the fact that the original rifle was the Model 69, first produced in 1935, and then sometime in the late 30s, I've read different years, some sources say 1937, some say 1939, but around there was some reasonably sort of major modifications done to the rifle, not major enough to make it a complete new model, but it's an upgraded model, so it became the 69A. Now recently I was perusing a online gun site and I noticed a Model 69 on there, and it was actually quite cheap. Here it is here. I think I paid 195 Australian dollars for it, which is about $130 US. Comes with the original peach sight and an original Winchester marked magazine. I'll show you that, which my other one never had. I've been using Wisner's magazines in that one. And the reason it was cheap was because it's missing its takedown button, but I should be able to sort that out. So what I thought I'd do today is I thought we could maybe do a side-by-side comparison on the difference between the Winchester Model 69 and the Winchester Model 69A. So what I'm going to do is just have these rifles side by side. So we've got Model 69 on the top and the Model 69A on the bottom. And we will go through each particular feature of the rifle and we'll compare the two. So that'll probably be the easiest way for you to tell the difference. Now there's a few kind of differences that aren't strictly model differences, and I'll point them out while we're going. Let's look first of all maybe at the stock. That'll be the best thing to do. So butt plate. Now I think the butt plate on this one, it doesn't look like it fits properly, and I think it's the original Winchester butt plate, but I think someone has it's probably had a broken butt plate and someone's actually replaced it. But I think it's probably, I don't know if it's exactly the same as the original butt plate for a 69 would be. Let's have a look. Are they both pretty much the same? Yeah, I think they are, aren't they? Yeah, they're both pretty much the same. So I think they're both original correct butt plates. It's just this one doesn't fit properly. But so if you look at the stock, it's probably a bit hard to tell when you're just looking at the rifle like this, but when you pick these rifles up and hold them, the 69A is just bigger and bulkier. So I think the actual stock, if you look at the size of the stock in this plane, it's bigger than this one. If you feel it, it's kind of fatter. You can see there's more timber here than here. This is smaller, this is a lot fatter, and the forearm is a lot fatter, and it's slightly longer as well. So I've got them pretty much so the triggers are lined up, so you can sort of see that the forearm's longer. So, and that's pretty typical. The early 20th century rifles, 22 rifles, they tended to, I think they thought that they were largely going to be used by, youths. And, they're often called boys' rifles, these little ones. When you go back further within the Winchester, there's the Model 1900, 1902, 1904. They're tiny little rifles. I do have a video. If you look back through my videos, I've got a video of 3 single-shot rifles, and I actually show the Winchester Model 1904 in that one. So it doesn't surprise me sort of that in the mid-30s they were still kind of making rifles fairly small, and then as time went on they realised that it was kind of adults that wanted to use them, and slightly bigger, easier to hold rifles are going to be easier to shoot and more accurate, so they sort of just made them bigger and beefier. Now, one thing that you'll note about the thickness of this forearm is you can see the whole thing is thicker. It's wider this way, it's wider across ways. If you look at that, So if you look at the magazine, see how much wood's on either side of that compared to this one. See, there's a lot less wood on this one. And the other thing you'll notice too is on this one you've got your takedown knob is proud. It's got some knurling on the outside, so you know, if you don't do it up too tight, you can actually unscrew it with your finger, and or you can just use a coin. It's designed for a dime. So I can use a 5-cent Australian coin. It's very similar, but you can loosen it with a dime, then you can unscrew it with your finger, and you'll notice that the magazine sort of sticks out a bit more. Whereas we go over to the model 69A, you can see now, because the wood is thicker, and maybe the knob might be, the shaft of the knob might be a bit shorter too, but it's now recessed in the wood, so you know it's not designed for unscrewing without a coin or a screwdriver. And you'll notice that the magazine is not sticking out as much because the wood's coming down further. Now if we look at the trigger guard and the trigger, this one's got a smooth trigger, this one's got a knurled trigger, but the trigger guard's pretty much the same. The surround around the magazine is the same, I think. If we look at that, yeah, it's pretty much, that's exactly the same. So let's turn them over. We'll go to the bolt, receiver, barrel and all that in a minute. Now don't take any notice of the fact that this is missing, it's missing a knob there. That's just this individual rifle. Now one thing I have discovered since I made the early video is this button in this rifle is not original. It seems like a common problem in these rifles. The actual takedown catch has a bigger diameter knob on the outside, then a spring, so it's always held outwards, and then on the inside the shaft goes in, and then there's a little groove, and it had a little spring wire clip on it, and that's the weak part. That little clip would get accidentally lost, probably when you're putting your action in and out, the little clip would get pushed off, lost, and then once it was lost, then this would just fall out with its spring and the whole thing would get lost, and that's what you'd be left with. And that's obviously happened to this one, and what someone's done is actually unscrewed that ferrule out of the wood and turned up a little thing that actually fits through the hole, but it's actually got a bigger diameter on the inside, so it can't fall out. And it actually works quite well, as you can see. However, you have to be careful when you put it together that you make sure that is out before you put the action in the receiver, otherwise it just gets all jammed up. Now Jack First in the US does actually have repros of these knobs available. That's not available to me because they won't send international, so I'm going to have to make one. Someone did offer to send me one from the Rimfire Central forum, but unfortunately there's no postage between the US and Australia at the moment, so I'll wait for that. But in the meantime, I might actually just copy this and make another one of them and put it in this one. And look, while we're here, we'll go to the magazine. So as you'll notice, it's got a ding in it, this magazine, but that's an original Winchester magazine, and despite the ding, it works fine. Whereas this other, see, the 69A came without a magazine, and this is actually a Wisner's Repro magazine, which, by the way, is absolutely excellent and as good as the original one. The barrels are 25 inches. The barrels are both the same length. If we line them up, you can see they're both the same. However, I didn't even notice this, but I was just reading on a forum that the 69 barrel is, got a reasonable taper to it, whereas the 69A barrel is heavier. It's got much less taper to it, despite the same length. Now, if we look at the sights, unfortunately we can't do a direct comparison. The Model 69 was originally, the standard sight was pretty much the same setup as this 69A, so a simple rear sight, flat notch rear sight with a little elevator in the centre, and then a front sight dovetailed into the barrel. The 69 would have had the same sight as standard, but it did come with other options, and this one's actually got the option of the Model 96B sight, front and rear sight, so they come as a set. So you can see the front sight is a ramp with a little dovetailed blade on it. It's supposed to have a hood as well, but the hood's missing. And at the back, you've got this little aperture sight with adjustment, both elevation and windage. So windage by pushing that little thing across, and elevation by turning the knob and raising or lowering it. So whereas the 69, I think this was only on the 69, this side, I think by the time the 69A came along, they had a different peep sight which was mounted on the back. Here you can actually see the mounting, there's mounting screw holes in there. So that if you bought one from the factory, it would have had a Lyman, I can't remember the model, but that would have been relieved and it would have had a Lyman peep sight there. Yeah, so we can't do a direct comparison with those. Now, the other thing you may have noticed with this rifle is there's actually a dovetail in the bottom of the barrel. Now, unfortunately, I have absolutely no clue why that's there. I've actually even put a post on the Rimfire Central website for the experts to tell me. And while there's a variety of suggestions, maybe some later owner did it for something or other, which is possible, but I don't know. I mean, the only thing you'd put there would be a sling, I would imagine. I thought initially they may have used a barrel out of the Model 75, I think it is, with the tube magazine, but apparently that was a different barrel, different profile or whatever. So I have no clue. Now you'll see this one also. Well, it's been drilled and tapped for some sort of scope mount, which I don't think is factory, although I'm not sure whether that may be a factory screw. But you'll notice that the receiver is perfectly round, whereas in this one, the post-war model, you see it's actually got a 3/8 inch dovetail for a telescopic sight. So that was introduced, I think, after the war. I think when they started production again after the Second World War, there were scopes were a thing by then. So what do we look at next? Maybe we'll look at markings. So I'll just go around the other side so we can read the marks, see how different or similar they are. All right, let's have a look at the 69 first. I'm just filming with my iPhone, so we've got to try to get it to focus. Made in USA, Winchester, repeating arms company, New Haven, Connecticut, patent pending. Model 69, 22 short, long rifle, Winchester trademark. And then if we go back, we've got just little Winchester proof marks on the barrel and receiver. So they're the main marks that are visible. Now, you'll notice no serial number. A lot of early American rifles didn't have a serial number because it wasn't required. This one has a serial number, but that's been put on later for Australian requirements, so that's not an original factory mark. Made in New Haven, Connecticut, US of America. Winchester Model 69A 22 SL or LR. So yeah, slight different script. We've still got our Winchester proofs on there. Next thing we need to look at is the bolt. So let's get our 69 back again. So if we just don't take a notice of the sight for a minute, but you will notice that it's actually got a cocking knob on the back. So if I want to, I'm just trying to hold the rifle and the phone and everything, I could actually cock that and see it says fire. Now, similar to when I was in the gun, I've got a safety on here. I can actually just, I'm just trying to do this with one hand and hold the iPhone at the moment. If I pull this and turn it clockwise, you will now see it says safe. So that's actually, pull the trigger. The trigger's actually disconnected now. Whereas if I say pull it back, go around and go fire, I won't pull the trigger, but that would fire now. So we'll see the difference when we go to the 69A. Now I'm just going to uncock that. All right, now one thing we'll notice is when I lift this up, it does move the bolt back a tiny bit, but it's actually cock on closing. So if I open it up and then I push it forward, you can see that's actually spring loaded there. So it's actually cocking as I push the bolt forward back that last little bit to close it. So it's a cock on close bolt. I'll pull the bolts out in a second and I'll put them side by side so we can compare them, but I just wanted to show you the function of the bolt, and I'll also take the rivets out of the stocks and we'll compare the triggers and everything as well. Let's have a look at the function of the 69A now. Alright, so here's the 69A bolt. It all looks a bit smooth because we don't have that big aperture sight there, but basically this part of the receiver, apart from the dovetails of the scope, is the same. So it's still just a tubular receiver. However, you'll see now the bolt is simply a cylindrical thing with like a bit on the back with a screw thing which is for taking down the bolt, which I haven't actually ever done. One thing you'll notice though is a common problem, I'll show you when to take the bolt out, is the handle actually is just put in a hole when it's manufactured and then staked on the other side, and the handles apparently commonly come loose like that, but it's not going to get any worse and it doesn't affect function, so I wouldn't worry about it. But one thing you will notice is instead of having the safety here, which obviously you can't have now because we haven't got that cocking knob, we've now got a separate safety catch. Now the other thing you'll notice too is, remember the other one, I opened it, moved back a little bit, but it was actually cocked when I closed the bolt. This one, if I lift the bolt up and then put it down, it's now cocked. And if I uncock it, you can't really tell because it doesn't have anything sticking out the back, but I can tell by the fact that when I push that down, there's no longer any spring. There was spring tension as I lifted it up. There's no spring tension when I put it down. So it's now cocked, and we've got a safety catch. Now put it on the side here. So as you can see, it's on safe forward, fire back. So it doesn't affect, you can still open the bolt and it's on safe, so all it does is lock the trigger. We'll have a look when we pull it apart and see how it works. So to uncock this one, see the other one I had to actually open the bolt a little bit to actually uncock it, but this one I simply uncock it by pulling the trigger. I'm pulling the trigger with my finger at the moment and then lowering that down, and that's now uncocked. So completely different way of firing. Let's take the bolts out now and we'll compare them side by side. Alright, here we are with the two bolts. So we've got 69, 69A. So I guess what we'll do is we'll just go from the front to the back and have a look. External, I'm not going to pull them apart or anything like that. So obviously there's internal differences as far as their function, but we'll just look at them mainly, I suppose, so that you can identify one. You know, if you need if you find a rifle without a bolt, you know, you can actually know what they look like. 69 bolt, let's start at the front. So you've got your extractor and little cartridge holder, so 2 pins holding there. So that's what they look like. So you can see the firing pin there. There's the actual sear surface there that holds the firing pin back. And you can see our actual handle is actually all one piece. It's this, and then it's this. It's all machined out of one piece of steel. And then we've got the safety system with a little notch where you rotate the safety. And we've got the striker with it says fire and safe, and the striker with the little knob on the end of it. Let's have a look at the 69A bolt. So again, similar design at the front. So let's just compare the sear surfaces. So here's the sear surface there. Sear surface seems to be back further on this one. It is. So that would suggest to me that the bolts are not... one thing I was actually intending to do was actually to try to swap them over and fire a couple of low noise rounds outside and see, but looking at this, I think there's no way they're going to... So obviously the triggers are slightly different because our sear surfaces are in completely different spots. So I don't think there's any point in trying them. So that answers the question that probably a lot of you were thinking is, can I use a 69 bolt in a 69A or vice versa? And looking at this, clearly you can't. Now let's have a look at this. Now this here, unlike this one where the bolt handle and this collar are all seem to be one machine part. Whereas we look at this one, the 69A, you can see how, well, see how the bolt handle is swept back. I think that was actually a change in the later 69s as well, 69A, sorry, as well. I believe maybe the early ones had a similar bolt handle to this, but the actual bolt handle itself is a different part to this sleeve. So that was obviously, it's cheaper to make rather than having to machine a whole bolt handle, you know, out of a single piece of steel. But this bolt handle is just slightly loose. See that? But it doesn't make any difference to function or safety or anything. It's just apparently that's just common. That's what they're all like, and you don't worry about it. So what we might do now is we might just take the rifles out of their stocks, and we'll just have a look at the trigger assembly, you know, magazine well, and then we'll pretty much be done. Right, I've got the rifles out of their stocks. Now, before we go any further, let's just have a look at this. We couldn't really see this takedown knob for the 69A before because it was actually recessed into the stock, but you can see it actually does, it's much smaller than the other one. It does have a little bit of knurling, so it means that you have to use your coin to screw it out till it comes out past the wood, and you can then grab it with your fingers and unscrew it the rest of the way. Whereas the 69 one, you just loosen it a tiny bit with the with your coin, and then you can actually use your fingers to screw it all the way out. If you look at the barrels, now that they're out of the stocks, you can kind of see more obviously the barrel is much heavier, even though it's the same length. It's probably the same diameter at the breech end here, but it's just heavier profile in general. You can see the muzzle's probably another, you know, 10 or 15% bigger diameter. And no other changes apart from that weird dovetail that we don't know what that is. The takedown screw ferrule in the barrel is a bigger diameter on the 69A compared to the 69, so they might have just decided it would be a bit more secure to have a big fat one. So if we come back now, if we look at the receivers themselves without anything else on, I think, as far as I can tell, they're pretty much, actually no, they're not. If you look at this receiver here, it's where it's machined, this part here is actually flat. It's sort of parallel with this surface here. So it's machined all the way down there. Whereas with the 69A, it's not machined down quite as far, I don't think. And also you'll note that there's actually a bevel, there's an inward bevel on that. So there's just less steel has been removed. They've obviously decided they don't need to cut quite so much away. A, that would make it cheaper, and also B, it'll make it stiffer and more accurate. So that's interesting. I hadn't noticed that before. I thought they were just exactly the same. But other than that, the receivers are pretty much the same, I think. So if we look at that, yeah, I think the notches for the bolt are the same. You can see you got your locator marks for the barrel are the same, screwed in barrel, obviously. Now let's get down to the magazine well and magazine catch. So the way that these magazines work is, we look at the 69 first. That little notch there is where the knob comes across from the button that you push. So when you push the button, it actually pushes this spring this way, which releases the magazine is actually held just here by this notch, so it actually lifts it out so the magazine can fall free. So those parts are the same. It looks like the actual cast aluminium or machined sort of aluminium receiver is pretty much the same on both of them, except for that screw there, which this one doesn't have. So let's have a look at the triggers and safety catches before we get to that screw. So the trigger on the 69 is a simple trigger. It's pivoted here. It's got the sear goes forward, and when you pull it, the sear just comes down. Smooth trigger. So simple trigger, there's nothing else to it. 69A, and you can see there's more going on here. So we've got the safety catch is pivoting on the same pin as the trigger is. So we've got fire, so that's the fire position there because the word's exposed. So fire, I can pull the sear right down, and safe, it's blocked. And when we looked at the bolts before, we saw that the sear catch was in a different spot. So I think this arm is a different length. Possibly, if you wanted to say use a 69A bolt in a 69, you'd have to use trigger and sear, I think, together. Trigger and bolt, sorry, together for them to work. So I don't think you can use a 69 trigger and a 69A bolt, or vice versa, because the sear point is in a different spot. This is the best view. We'll put it on fire, and let's just go over here. Now, if you look at this little see this plate here, which got the little knob on the end. If I lift that up, if I pull the trigger, see that can actually come up. There's nothing stopping that, so the whole sear is coming out of the receiver and releasing the firing pin to fire the rifle. Whereas if I'll keep it in this position if I now put it on safe, so see that, push that plate forward, and it's now actually held under this little notch in the magazine well, and that's now safe. So the trigger is kind of a bit different. I think it's a bit longer, probably because the stock's fatter, so the trigger has to stick out further. I think this part here is a little bit longer than that one there. And you know, we haven't got all the safety things on the original 69. Now the other thing that we see is different is we've got this screw here which goes through here. Now I haven't touched this. I have read in the 69A they introduced a screw adjustable trigger, so this is obviously some sort of adjustment. I haven't actually mucked around with it, but obviously you've got a little bit of kind of adjustment there on that trigger, but it's fairly rudimentary. You'd have to pull it apart to actually have a look at this, which I haven't done. So I think we've pretty much covered all the differences between a 69 and a 69A. So here, there you have it. I must admit there was a few things that, as we were going through that, there's a couple of things that I noticed that I hadn't realised were differences. So I learned a little bit as well. The total number of 69s and 69As between 1935 and 1963 was about 355,000 and change. I haven't been able to find the actual breakdown of the number of 69s made. I'm sure it must be somewhere, but I haven't been able to find it. And that's not any of the common things. As far as shootability goes, I've actually shot both of them in competition. The 69, see if we can get comfortable here. 69, well again, we've got the peep sight, which kind of makes it not really a fair comparison. I'd obviously rather a peep sight than a normal sight, but this one's just smaller and lighter. So, and I can't shoot this one quite as well. So whether despite the aperture size, whether that's a function of just the actual ergonomics and size of it, or whether the heavy barrel makes this one a little bit more accurate, I haven't actually really done a side-to-side bench rest test on it. If I had the choice, if you had a gun shop that had a nice one of both of these sitting there, they're both the same price, and you were going to buy one of them. If I was buying it for a young fella who was maybe not so small, or a woman maybe, who wants something a bit smaller and lighter, maybe you'd go for the original 69, because it is a smaller, lighter sort of rifle, just feels different. Whereas if you're just interested in a shooter and it's for you, I would go for the 69A. Yeah, it's just chunkier. It just feels chunkier. It's probably better balanced, you know, balances a bit further forward. And of course you've got a heavy barrel, which is probably likely to be a bit more accurate. You know, obviously a 69A with a peep sight would be ideal. But I think that's pretty much about it. So I hope you enjoyed this. You're obviously into 69s or Winchesters if you did. It's a question, like you read on the forums where they talk about the difference is this and the difference is that and the difference is this, but I haven't seen anywhere where they've got one side to side. So hopefully that was vaguely interesting for you. And anyway, until next time, thanks for watching.